All right, we are recording, and this is the Dialogue Doctor Slack book club. For some of us, very early in the morning, Aaron and Laura. For other of us, mid-afternoon. Thanks for joining us, Shane. And we are going to be talking about The House of the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, which I loved. So I'm just going to say that up front. But first, everybody go around and introduce yourself. Y'all are all part of y'all are all fantastic members of the Dialogue Slack community, which I love. So go around and tell us what your name is, where you are in the world, and what you're writing, what you're working on. I'm Jeff. I'm in Maryland. If you don't know my voice, welcome to the podcast. Laura, you want to go first? Hey, welcome back.
So I'm Laura. I'm Jeff's partner in this Dialogue Doctor thing, and I'm also in Maryland, which is weird because Jeff said it's early for me, but it's like normal time for him. So yeah, I'm not good at mornings.
Yeah. I've been rolling for 4 hours already. So I'm at like midday.
4 hours.
Yeah. I've edited 3 chapters of my book that's coming out in May this morning.
Okay. I went to bed like 6 hours ago. No, it's not true. 7 hours ago. I can do math. But not this early in the morning. I'm editing for a couple clients whose books are amazing. Thank you, Faye. I'm not am I currently writing anything? I don't know that I'm currently writing anything. I guess I'm writing the Dialogue Doctor book. That's it. Yeah. Okay.
You are working on that. All right, Shane.
Okay, so I am based in, it's about 40 minutes outside of London in the UK. As Jeff said, my name is Shane, and I hate doing these introductions, but we'll give it a go. So I'm an urban fantasy author. You can pick up my free short story from my website, which is swmiller.com. That's a shameless plug. And my first full-length novel will be out in February 2022, and it's called The Witch's Revenge, which Jeff was kind enough to help me on with a couple of scenes. So
it's fantastic.
Thank you very much.
And actually, when this airs, they will have the podcast listeners will have just heard your episode where we edited, because that goes up.
Oh, there we go.
In 2 days. We're recording this on a Saturday. That goes up in 2 days. So
nice.
Yeah, lots of Shane over the next 2 weeks on the podcast, which is a joy. All right, Tom.
Hey, I'm Tom Holbrook. I live in New Hampshire, where it's winter, and I write under a pen name, sort of slapstick noir. Chicago Blue is the first one. But I also have a small press called Piscataqua Press, which is vanity publishing without the extortion or theft. And I have a small bookstore called River Run Bookstore at riverrunbookstore.com.
Aaron?
I'm Aaron Goldblatt, and I operate under the pseudonym V.E. Griffith. My big thing right now is that I'm a 3-story method certified editor, and I'm doing the 3-story method story diagnostic and combining that with line editing if that's what you're needing.
Yeah, and you were on a podcast a couple of weeks ago. No, the other 3-story editors. You didn't make it.
I didn't. I don't remember even you scheduling that one, so I missed it totally.
I mean, 'tis the season to lose times and dates.
Yeah.
But yeah, you'll be on one in January, I think. We're going to do another one. Okay. I'll force you on that one. I'll come and grab you in Houston and demand that you get on.
Well, that would be cool, except I'm near Dallas.
Dang it. I'll come and grab you in Dallas.
You're thinking of Cathrees.
I am. Yeah, I'm off to a raging start this morning, guys. Faye.
That's what happens when you get up too early in the morning.
Oh, dear Lord.
Yeah. The gods didn't mean for humans to get up before the crack of noon.
Faye, tell us where you're at and what you're writing.
Okay, so I live in Canada, and there's a big windstorm going on right now. So that's why my internet is unhappy. I am a veterinarian by day, and this week was one of those weeks where I wanted to quit and become a combine driver. And I decided that I'd come here and talk about story instead.
That's awesome. And you are working on a book that is amazing.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm working on Superhero Mom book, and I keep coming up with new plot lines that drive me crazy. So
awesome. Okay, so let's talk about our book for this month. And I have a full confession to make. Because people have asked me why it takes us so long to do, like, because we've only done 4 of these this year, and people are like, why does it take you so long to do a book club? And this is a perfect illustration of why. I read the first half of this book in my paperback copy, and then I lost that paperback copy, and it took me 2 weeks to find it. I still haven't found it. I think I left it at a doctor's office. So I listened to the last, I read 2/3. I listened to the last third on audiobook because I lost. But if you want to know why it takes us so long to do a book club, I'm notorious for losing books. I've lost every book we've read into the book club, and usually buy like 2 or 3 copies. So authors and publishers, you're welcome. I have another copy of TJ Klune's book ordered. It's coming because I don't know where I put my first one. Yeah. So anyway, but
and also I don't start reading a book until we actually set the date for the book club. So
yeah, that happens too. So we are reading The House in the Cerulean Sea. Before we talk about it, let me just give listeners some background. This is by TJ Klune. He started writing, his first published book was in 2013. Called Into the River, I Drown, which I'm super excited about reading. Sounds amazing. He has another one out right now called The House Under the Whispering,
Under the Whispering Door.
Under the Whispering Door, not The House Under the Whispering Door, just Under the Whispering Door, which I've heard is equally as fantastic as The House in the Cerulean Sea. Yeah, I read that he got the idea to write this book from how the nation of Canada treats Indigenous children, which was a fascinating, I think, inspiration. So let's get into it. First, let's go general opinions and thoughts on the book. What did you love? What did you not like? Where are we at with it?
We're gonna go around, or
you can just talk. I don't know. I don't want to force anybody to talk. I'll share my opinion first. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I was deep into the children. And I will just openly say this is the first LGBTQ romance that I've ever read, and it was marvelous. It was a fantastic book. I was actually wasn't aware when I started reading it that was a plot line in it, and I was there for it the whole time. Absolutely loved the plot line. So I was into it. Anybody else? What did y'all think? Go for it, Tom.
Yeah, so I think this is an amazing book for this Dialogue Doctor book group, because what I was struck by was the book is delightful. I sell books. I sell this book all day long, and the word I use for it is delightful, because people are always looking for something that's really well written, but not a crazy downer, which is a very small Venn diagram, very small crossover there. So this is one that I can be like, it's delightful. But when I look at it with my editor's hat on, I see some massive structural problems, and I don't care, because the dialogue is so good and the character voices are so good. And I think for our specific conversation, it's fascinating to look at the way that dialogue and character voice can just raise a book up. I mean, an entire another level. Just from an editing standpoint, I thought the third act was really weak. And I didn't care, because the characters were so great. I thought there was at least one too many kids, and I didn't care, because I liked them all.
Yeah.
Like Chauncey adds nothing to the book, but he is delightful.
But he's my favorite.
He is, which is, kill your darlings. How could you take Chauncey out? But if you take Chauncey out, does the book change in any major way?
He was my favorite.
But he'd probably my favorite too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was delightful, and I had some specific things to the other questions that I thought were just phenomenal.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll jump into scenes in a minute. Any other thoughts on the general book, general opinions? Go for it, Shane.
Yeah, so I agree with Tom. I think it was a great job of keeping each character voice distinct and separate, which, as we all know, can be challenging. And also, I thought, although I agree that the third act was weak, I think that the setup of the opening scene being like dull, grey, boring London, the ending scene being this like fantastically vibrant, colourful island, that is a perfect example of ending in a completely different place to where you start. So I thought that was managed really well.
Awesome. Anyone else want to go for it?
I really liked the theme of the monsters were only monsters because they were told they were monsters.
Yeah.
And they never acted like that except in self-defense.
Yeah. It's a beautiful theme through the book of acceptance and understanding self. And yeah. Laura, you got any thoughts?
I just loved it. I thought everything about it was great. I knew exactly where it was going after the second chapter. That's not true. Not from the second chapter. I knew exactly where it was going, and I was in for it the whole time. I actually disagree with Tom. I think if you take Chauncey out, you lose a lot of discrimination based off of appearance, which I think and a lot of like hope and dreams dashed because of that discrimination. All of the other children, with the exception of Theo, can pass, if you will, in appearance, and Chauncey can't. So losing Chauncey, you really lose that. And his character, above all of the other children, has a levity to him of hopefulness despite the discrimination that he's facing. And he's also a great example of what Faye's talking about monsters being told they're monsters. And that's why they act. And there are several conversations that the two adult characters, or two of the adult characters, Linus and Arthur have about him acting like that because he's told that that's what monsters do, right? Like hiding under the bed, because that's what monsters do. They hide under the bed. So I think losing him, I also think that Klune did a really great job of like identifying all the different types of discrimination and creating a character surrounding each of those. I think that was really brilliantly done. So
I will, before I if Tom wants to respond, you can, Tom, since you got called out. I will just want to note, though, that this is the first book club book that Laura has loved.
That's not true. I liked the one I picked.
You did. You did.
Tracy Clark's.
You did like Tracy Clark's book. That's true.
Yeah.
Big question. Did you finish it?
Yes, I did. I finished it at 1 a.m.
Nice.
I also liked Beloved, though Beloved was very emotionally taxing on me.
You gave me so much crap for Beloved.
Because it was so emotionally taxing. You can't start a book club with an emotionally taxing book. You need to start it with something like this.
Do what I want, Laura.
I mean, obviously.
Yeah, one of the lines I loved, going back to actually the book that we're talking about, one of the lines that I loved the most was, actually laughed out loud and put the book down, was when Chauncey held his hand out for a tip because he gave Linus a compliment. And Linus was like, "I'm not tipping you for compliments, Chauncey." Just like, oh. I laughed really hard. Yeah, okay. Any other general thoughts on the book? I mean, we're talking about Chauncey. Any other general thoughts on Chauncey?
I take Theo out instead. I just meant that there's too many characters for what's happening in the book.
There were a lot, and you did.
And Chauncey was my favorite, but I was just picking him as an example. But.
Yeah.
I got Fee and Talia confused sometimes.
Yeah. Aaron, were you going to say something?
I really enjoyed it. And I also did the audiobook, and I thought Daniel Henning as a narrator was just amazing. He actually, if you read the paper or the ebook, he actually did the voices, so it was very easy to keep everybody straight. The one sort of big takeaway that I had, and that always drives me crazy when I read books, is that there was so much passive writing. There were so many passive sentences. If you removed the word "was" from that book, it would be so much better. But I really did enjoy the story, but that always pulls me out of the story for a minute.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't notice. I was so wrapped into what was going on, I didn't even hear it.
So I think that's a function of Linus's voice.
Yeah.
As Linus was leading the narration, and Linus was such a passive character that I think that's where you're getting the "was"s coming in.
Let's talk about scenes. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think actually you may be right, because I noticed it much more heavily in the beginning of the book, when it was all Linus before he went to the orphanage, and his life really was dreary and dull, and how has anybody who does this not killed themselves yet?
Which the neighbor was very blunt about.
Yes.
Oh man.
Yes.
Yeah.
I also loved, just as we're talking about the neighbor, I love the way Klune cued us in to the LGBTQ themes without coming out and saying, and he was a gay man, right? Like the conversation there felt really natural and very organic, and didn't feel like anybody was being outed. It felt like this is how people see and observe the world. Obviously, being a cis straight person, it's hard for me to know and understand that, but I did appreciate the subtlety with which they handled that. Whereas oftentimes in books, when you've got a LGBTQ character, they're like pointed out and almost tokenized. So I was really appreciative of that theme there.
Yeah.
Again, I don't
love
think
that.
you're going to hear me say anything bad about this book.
I
Clearly, I will defend it.
I'm impressed.
Pick good books, Jeff.
Okay, let's do well, we voted on it. I won't take credit for it. We voted on it. Let's talk about scenes. What was your favorite scene?
The record store.
Nice. What'd you love about the record store?
I just the whole fact, what was his name? J-Bone?
Yeah.
Like
the pothead.
like
I don't know how
little,
else to describe him. The pothead.
like little dude, like I love how he just he didn't care about Lucy, about all the other things that people were afraid of with Lucy. He was just seeing someone who appreciated music. And then just that part of it was really well done, and I really enjoyed that.
That's awesome. Yeah, and his partner being locked in the closet for trying to exercise Lucy was also hysterical. Yeah. Anyone else? Favorite scenes?
I think the introduction to Lucy in general was brilliant, in terms of they kind of built this up to be a character to be feared and revered, and they'd mentioned certain things just beforehand, and then it's this tiny kid who's like, rain down hellfire on you, and it's perhaps the least threatening character ever. I thought that was great.
I will bury you in darkness.
Yeah.
I will boil your insides. Yeah, it was the best.
Yeah, I'll make your insides onto your outsides. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just, and he's 6. It was just hysterical.
I think the record store scene was one of my favorite, because the reaction was unexpected, and a lot of the rest of the book is delightful but not surprising. But from a craft standpoint, the Talia Sorkin, Aaron Sorkin walk and talk was my favorite, which is chapter 5. So he shows up at the island and meets Talia, and she walks him through every single kid character without it feeling clunky, and it's just fabulous. And all I could see was like Leo and Josh walking down the halls of the West Wing.
Yeah,
it was a perfect Aaron Sorkin walk and talk. It was great.
Yeah, it was a really fantastic way to get, because like you were saying earlier, there are a lot of characters in the book. There's a lot to track, and it was a brilliant way to introduce us to everyone on the island in a very like entertaining way, where Talia, who is a gnome, described as like a garden gnome with a full beard, she walks him, kind of setting these characters up, like Shane was saying, in these like horrifying ways about how they're going to destroy Linus and do horrible things to him. It's hysterical.
And I hadn't noticed it till Shane said it, but it sort of builds to it. It is building to Lucy the whole way, even though she's taking it from one character to another from the very beginning. She's mentioning Lucy and what Lucy will do and how she can bury Linus in her garden when Lucy's finished killing him.
Yeah, and really fantastic technique he uses, keeping Arthur, the headmaster, and future love interest, completely mysterious, because she's just talking about the children. And so leaving that, like when Arthur finally appears on the scene, the like revelation of his, lots of talk about Lucy, right? Like, and lots of like build up to like the horror of the Antichrist child, but very, very little about the headmaster until he appears on the scene. And then I found myself very taken by his the moment of his introduction that comes right after that walk and talk, which was great. So. Any other favorite scenes?
Yes, the adventure scenes.
Yes.
Where they're walking through the woods, and each child has their own voice and their own opinion on it, and Lucy's in charge but is willing to sacrifice everyone else. I think you really feel each child's personality and their relationships to one another, which I think is pretty brilliant. I again, nothing bad to say about the book, but
yeah,
I actually bookmarked that scene to go back and reread it, because it was so well done with the voices. And Klune obviously has been listening to our podcast because of the way that he I am quite sure that he does not, but if he wants to, but like the pacing and the cadence of each child's voice, and even the words that they choose, are very, very different from one another, their body language. I was so impressed. Like, I kept reading and I was like, ooh, and that's our technique. And ooh, yeah, do that.
Yeah. TJ Klune, if you listen to this and you want to come onto the podcast, we will just sit and revel at your feet for a good hour.
Can we just say that basically every big cast scene was brilliant? I mean,
yeah, this book is so for those listening the first time, we define big cast scenes as characters of usually 3 to 5. Klune is so good at it, he often pulls off like 7 characters in a big cast scene, which is so hard to do. And I like, this book is a masterclass in how to write a big cast scene. No characters are lost, right? Like, where everybody is all the time. Dialogue is used to communicate emotion in this brilliant way. He doesn't overwhelm them with prose. They're like, it's just the characters talking to each other, even in this like adventure setting where they're like walking through the woods together, which were my favorite scenes too, by the way, Laura, where they're walking through the woods together and like talking about cannibals potentially eating them. It's very dialogue driven. The book is just, if you want to know how to write a big cast scene, this is the book you read to learn, because it was fantastic.
Yeah, the mob scene as well. Like, if you're looking for example of a crowd scene, perfect. Yeah. I will say, I mean, just to be perfectly fair and honest, there was a lot of prose in the beginning chapters that I skipped.
I was in for it, and you know why I was in for it? Yeah, and Chris Kane and I actually looked at chapter 2 on a podcast a couple of weeks ago. So if you want to hear me go real
Mm.
in depth into it, I will. There's a lot of prose, but he never goes more than 4 paragraphs without somebody talking. There's a lot of prose, but he keeps that dialogue in there to keep things moving. And again, clearly he listens to our podcast because he wrote this a long time ago. He wrote this way before we started the podcast, but
Yeah.
he's using like the techniques that we talk about all the time. This is a great example of it. He keeps the pace moving with dialogue, even in like these long scenes. Speaking of keeping the pace moving with dialogue, another technique he uses that we talk about all the time. You have a loner character who's all alone, give them something to talk to. And so he gives Linus a cat, and like Linus has these conversations with a partner that does not answer, but it allows Linus to talk in these scenes, even though he's all alone, which is just another brilliant.
And he does have Calliope the cat respond the way that a cat would respond. So Calliope actually becomes an integral character in the storyline. But yes, very brilliantly well done.
Yeah.
You mentioned it in the podcast with Chris, but also the third person narration talks to itself. It sort of asks questions and answers it. Really well done again, which makes it feel like there's dialogue going on even when there's not.
Yeah, and if we can talk about character transformation for a minute, so Linus's transformation as a character is shocking. It's so well done. Not shocking. You see it coming. I mean, shocking by like how well it's constructed.
Sorry, do we need? Yeah, I was gonna say, do we need to do some sort of spoiler alert on this?
Spoiler alert. I'm going to spoil the crap out of this. I actually don't think I have to spoil it. I won't talk about the very end. Well, I will a little bit. So yeah, spoiler. Go read it and then come back. Go buy 5 copies. Read it.
You can read it in 8 hours.
You can. Yeah, Laura proves that. She read it in 8 hours.
The audiobook is like 12.
Yeah, and it is. I only listened to the last third of it, but the audiobook is really well done. So talking about character transformation, one of the things I loved that he does with Linus is that third person narration, where Linus speaks and then then thinks the opposite of what I can't think of a direct example, and I lost my copy of the book.
With his boss.
Yeah, with his boss, and it happens in the garden with Talia, and it slowly disappears. And by the end of the book, he's just saying what he thinks. And it's a beautiful technique for character transformation to take that inside voice and make it his outside voice. And it was so well done. I was really taken aback because I thought and it's not a full transformation, because I think he still has some of it in his final conversation with Arthur. But again, sorry, I don't have a book to read a passage, but it really was, I was really in awe of how Klune matured Linus's voice through the text. Is really just to demonstrate that like Linus is changing, Linus is undergoing transformation. Yeah, it was a great technique. Yeah. Any other scenes or techniques you loved? I'll also say cheating in character, like another thing we've talked about, we haven't talked about it for several months, but another thing we've talked about on the podcast is using repeated scenes to demonstrate character transformation. And Klune starts and ends the book in the exact same way. We get Linus at home, he has a conversation with his neighbor at the beginning of the book. He has he goes to work. He has a conversation with his boss. He shows up at the town. He goes to upper management. He has a conversation with upper management. He then shows up at the town and gets on the ferry. Those are the first opening scenes of the book. The ending scenes of the book, he talks to his neighbor. He goes to work. He has a conversation with upper management. He gets on the ferry. And so using these repeated scenes to be like, hey, look at how Linus is changing. even through the middle of the book, we have these repeated conversations, like the first conversation with Lucy, and then the next conversation with Lucy and Arthur, and then the final conversation, well, not the final, but then a conversation with Arthur, with Linus and Lucy by themselves, right? Like you again see this like transformation of the character by taking a character and putting him in repeated circumstances where everything around him is the same. The only thing that's going to change is the character. You get to demonstrate character transformation by like cheating with those repeated scenes. And it was, Klune did it so well. I was like, damn, I am impressed.
I think he did it with the interaction in the kitchen as well,
Mhm.
preparing for the meals.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you're right. You're 100% on. I had missed that one, but you're right. Yeah. Any other favorite scenes? All right, thoughts on, let's go into themes of the book. Shane had posed a great question. What do we think of Klune's depiction of the Antichrist and religion throughout the conversation?
We don't use that word in this house.
We don't use I
This
love
is
that
the-
so much.
This is the beauty of reading the book 6 hours before the podcast.
You remember?
Everything is still fresh.
It's really funny.
Yes, because I'm the idiot that reads it when it's announced.
Yeah, you don't account for Jeff losing his copies
In
like
2019.
Laura does.
Uh,
It wasn't announced in 2019. We announced it in June.
I feel like it was after June. I'm gonna look that up now.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I read
Yeah.
it early, but I skimmed it again. It doesn't quite answer the question. But again, one of the things I liked about what Klune did was that he does not explain the world building at all. Like, Antichrist, what does that mean? What are the implications? We don't know. Doesn't matter. Could he destroy the world? Maybe. It's not really gone into.
Is his father Satan? Yes. What does that mean? It's great.
The closest we get is the exorcism, and even that is just, an off-camera scene where the guy winds up getting slammed into a wall. It's great. It's not explained, and it doesn't need to be.
We never actually see Lucy use his powers in a menacing way, which is a beautiful, like taking that scene off camera keeps Lucy as a child for us. Because you walk in, Linus walks into the room and there is a man on the floor. And then you have the pothead whose name, Faye, I can't remember again.
J-Bone?
T-Bone.
Yeah,
J-Bone.
celebrating what happened, right? Like, so again, great characterization technique to keep Lucy as a child for us and to maintain that image of him as a 6-year-old, and to keep his powers kind of under this mysterious cloak of like, could he actually boil my bones? Like, is that something he could actually do? You never really know. Yeah. Shane, did you have any thoughts on it?
Well, I was just going to say, I think it spoke a lot to a theme of redemption, which I thought ran through the book quite a lot, in that even the Antichrist can, whatever that means in this context, we don't know, that even the Antichrist can be redeemed, or he can be shaped into a better person or whatever. And I think that carried through really well.
Yeah, they do talk about at some point Arthur references how he's lived in darkness for a long time, and that this body he's in is 6, but he's not actually 6. And so there is that I think by framing the character in that way, it does like bring in that redemption theme that you're talking about, where he's becomes a character that's like, hey, this is what society would call the absolute worst of the worst. And with just compassion and empathy, he transforms into compassion, empathy, and community. He transforms into something, his potential, right? Like something else, which is.
And the way that they show him having nightmares, it's almost like he has PTSD from his, past as the Antichrist.
Yeah. And the way Arthur talks to him, Arthur like he says all these, like, I'm going to do these terrible things to you, and Arthur plays them off as metaphors for his feelings, which is just fantastic. Kind of, but in that way of, like, in a very much deeper way, saying like, oh, this is just how he talks, right? Like, he doesn't mean any of it. Yeah.
And I think that Klune did an amazing job of taking this very ancient voice and translating it down to the way a 6-year-old talks, right? Like, even the scene in the classroom where they're having self-expression and he's standing on the desk spouting doom and gloom, but he's doing it in a very 6-year-old way. And in the scene in the record store, when Linus is able to bust into the room and sees the kid on the floor, the adult on the floor. I guess I pictured him as like a 20-year-old.
Yeah, he seems like an
25-year-old.
early 20s by the way he's
Yeah.
described.
And the kid is like, it happened, right? Like kids do, like they do something and then they immediately like go on to the next thing. They, adults tend to like, and you can kind of see the juxtaposition with Linus, right? Like Linus does something and worries and worries and worries and worries as an adult, but the children do something and it's like, oh, well, I did it. It happened. Let's move on, right? Like, so it was this really great, like when they're talking philosophy, and there's a scene where Lucy, who's this 6-year-old, ancient in a 6-year-old's body, is discussing Kant, right? Like in using these huge words, but little kid cadence. It's really a brilliant amalgamation. And like, if we ever decide that we want to do a character voice chart for a book like this, because like as I'm reading and as an editor, like this is what I just kind of naturally do in my head. I'm seeing the patterns in the voices and like putting words in the different columns because I'm a nerd and that's how I process things. But like I could like see his character chart coming together, and like as we were talking about words, like the very large words, but his cadence is very quick paced and moving forward and like interrupting and just a lot of like 6-year-old stuff where it's like me. And then, oh, wait, I'm 6 now. I'm supposed to realize that everything isn't all about me. So let me give you a space. But now it's me again, right? Like, and if any of you know a 6-year-old, like you can kind of see that behavior with them. Again, brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, as ex-clergy, for those that listen to this all the time, and I have heard bits and pieces of my past, the way Klune handles the like mythos and superstitions coming from religion, I thought was very deep. I could have an hour conversation alone about his dealing of how he handles kind of the religious context around these kids. It was really I was very moved by it. I was like, this is incredibly well thought out. And that, and I'll just say, like, the question of what is moral that like spins through the book, and those in power being allowed to set morality for everyone else, was, yeah, it is in itself a incredibly deep conversation he's having in the book about morality and who gets to determine what's right and wrong, who gets to say what mythos is true and what's not. Yeah.
And even beyond that, the rules and regulations, right? Like there's a fantastic scene about social justice, hidden in this story where Linus is talking about how the rules and regulations are put in place to keep us safe. And Arthur's like, but who wrote the rules and regulations? And they're like, the people in charge. And he's challenged, right? Like Arthur challenges him and is like, there were no mythical people included on, and Linus is taken aback. But right, like think about legislation as it relates to LGBTQ rights. For so long, individuals who identify as LGBTQ plus were not included in creation of that legislation, right? And like we see how demoralizing and violent things can get because of that. So I thought the themes of social justice hidden inside of the storyline,
and the treatment
really,
of all minority groups in
yeah,
like by people with power was really
yep.
Yeah.
And
Really great.
what I really appreciated it was part of the story. It didn't feel like it was a like, okay, we're going to use this as a fable so that you can understand the moral plot of this. And it wasn't like in your face in every moment, in every scene, but it crescendoed in different places throughout the story where the story really needed it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on scenes, or I guess we've branched also into like techniques he's using? No? Okay, great. So let's talk about which was your favorite character and why. Because it's a characterful book. So I don't ask that of every book we do in the book club. Like that isn't a standard question.
Yeah.
But the characterization in this book is so great. Which was your favorite and why?
This is an unfair question. There were so many great characters.
There
I
were.
don't even know if I can pick one.
I'm going to make you pick one. I'm going to force you to pick one.
Okay.
And no one's allowed to repeat. I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Faye. I'm like a nasty schoolmaster now. I'm like, no one can repeat. Everyone has to give me a unique answer.
Oh, darn. Okay. So I liked Sal because Calliope liked him and dogs and cats. So
nice. Fair.
And he was a gentle soul who was, like he was the introvert of the group. Because like if he got too much attention, he turned into a dog. And he was a writer.
Yeah, and he wrote a beautiful poem that I actually copied and put on my wall because it's just a beautiful metaphor about being paper, which is I thought was incredibly deep. But yeah, I love Sal too. Anybody else? Character you want to stand up for or say something you loved about?
I don't think Talia got the recognition she deserved. Her lines were hilarious, just hilarious. And I also liked, and I'm sure this was all on purpose, but in a book with so many fantastical characters, to have Chapelwhite, who was the island guardian, and Helen, who was the mayor, were basically performing the same function as the sort of voice of reason, but on the side of right and not on the side of bureaucracy. But they were the ones who like, we still got to get dinner on the table. We got to do this. We got to go and stop acting like an idiot. And they both did that in their different worlds, and they did it effectively and quietly. It was great.
Yeah. Talia also gets her repeated scene because he meets her in the garden in the beginning. She walks him through, like we talked about, she walks him through every character. And at the end, when he arrives on the island, he immediately meets her in the garden, which is another using a character like her with such, like you're saying, Tom, with such a strong and like identifiable voice that is so entertaining to create this moment of character change for both of them was really
it's a really emotional moment because she is dying to find out why he's back, but she's not gonna.
Yeah, and very angry that he left. Like, not talking, refusing to acknowledge his presence. It was
again
great.
Very childlike voice encompassed.
Yeah, because isn't she hundreds of years old too?
Yeah,
she is.
But they do a great job of explaining that she's like 259 years old, but adult gnomes don't become adults until they're 500. So she's 15, right? Like if you take it, and they talk about her being a teenager, right? Like and the teenage angst that comes with it. So that sulkiness that she has when he comes back feels very 15-year-old, right? Like just very well done, very well thought out. again, without explaining the world building to us, without explaining that gnomes and how she came to be, they just say that she lost her family, right? Like bringing everybody together, where it's almost as if your past doesn't matter. It's what you do with your present and plan for your future that becomes, again, morals without having in your face.
Any other characters anybody wants to defend? I don't know.
Yeah, so I think not because I liked the character, I actually hated the character, but I think they were my favorite. It was the neighbor, just because we all know somebody like that, or we've all lived next to somebody like that. And it was such a realistic depiction, but as a hazard character, because that's kind of the bracket I put her in, she had a unique voice and a loud voice. And we all know someone like that. So I think technique wise, that was probably my favorite character.
Yeah, that's really great. And for those who haven't listened to Shane's episode that'll air before this one, he and I talk about hazard characters and taking a side character and blowing their voices up really big, to force the lead character, in this case was just Linus, to give them something to respond to. It would have been very easy for Klune to write that character as just a dull, nosy neighbor, but taking her to level 10 blows her scenes up in a really great way that makes them memorable and forces the lead character Linus into conversations that make him define who he is as a character, which was really, again, I can't say it enough, really well done. Yeah.
I think it was so funny how she was like belittling him in one sentence and in the very next sentence trying to set him up with her grandson.
Yeah.
Just like the juxtaposition of that, I just laughed.
Yeah, it was great. I think my favorite character was Arthur. I was taken by him as a caregiver, and like the way that he could identify the strengths and weaknesses of each child and cater his care to each child was really beautiful. I loved the way that I saw his big reveal coming. I think we all probably saw his big reveal coming, but it's so perfectly fits into his characterization. I did not care that I saw it coming. I was like, I love that. And the way that it's held back in conversations with Linus, not necessarily for like suspense purposes, but I read it as rather to communicate Arthur's hesitancy in his fear of rejection. Giving him that kind of depth as a character was really, I think, marvelous. And so like I left the book being like, man, if only everybody could be loved by somebody like Arthur. Like that's a beautiful character, written amazingly, constructed. The ease of his tone in the book, and by tone I mean like the way his sentences are constructed. They're not long, but they are deep at the same time, like using that cadence and pacing like we've talked about. The way that he talks to the children, like it's just he was a really beautifully written character. He's going to go down, I think, as one of my favorite characters in things that I've read, because I really enjoyed his voice and what Klune did with him. Yeah.
The one that I really sort of identified with, not as an anti-character that I hated, was the guy at work with the clipboard, and he struck me as a perfect portrayal of that supervisor who isn't just a rule stickler and a jerk, but who delights in being a rule stickler and a jerk. It's like it's what he lives for. Yeah, Gunther. And I've had bosses like that, and they're so nasty, and you can't do anything if you want to hang on to your job. You just have to put up with it, and it gets to be, he and the other one as well, but he especially, his presence is just so degrading that it really struck me as a true to life moment in, in horrible soul crushing jobs. I had a supervisor who was very much like that at, of all places, a pizza place. And, it was just, that supervisor was the person that turned it into a job where I wanted to go kill myself every morning rather than go into the office, and so that character was just very, very true to life to me.
I think this is a great opportunity to bring up something Tom said in the Slack that's interesting, is thinking about a question we were talking about. I don't remember if we were talking about it in the Slack or talking about it on the podcast. I don't remember, about what makes a voice realistic and authentic. And Aaron, I think you're hitting on it really well, in that, like, it's not necessarily because, Lucy's voice isn't realistic, right? Like, but it's authentic to who the character is. And there's something about that we find ourselves in. Aaron, like you saying, like, yeah, I see Gunther in the world around me. Tom, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, and I was really struck when you were just talking about Arthur. Arthur's dialogue is in no way realistic. He says the correct thing every time he opens his mouth to the children. And if you have children, you very often say the wrong thing to children. And then you're like, oh, I did not do that well. But we love Arthur because, he's Gandalf, basically. We love him because of the warmth and kindness with underlying power. That's an incredibly attractive character. And everything he says is great. And I was just thinking, it was in Slack, Roland had been talking about it, about what, how realistic do you want to be? Because people who, if you think of books that you love the dialogue on, it's not necessarily realistic, especially with children. So I'm thinking of like John Green. If you've read John Green books, he writes, he's basically like, or John Hughes movies, those teenagers don't talk like real teenagers. And that's why you love the books, because he captures their angst and what they're worried about and what their emotions are and what their concerns for the future are. But he does it with heightened dialogue that makes it super, super entertaining. And I thought Klune did some fun things along that lines. The mob scene, which I had thumbed because it's Monty Python. It's basically the witch scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, with the same sort of, he takes the dialogue here to a absurd, it's completely absurd level. And in a way that he when he's doing the conversations between the main characters, he's less flippant. He's much more serious about it. But this conversation just goes off the rails, and it was perfect for the scene. It was great. But yeah, when people talk about realistic dialogue, I think they're not really talking about how people actually talk, but they're talking about how people talk to express the character. And he does that great.
Laura, were you going to say something? Okay. Yeah, there's a connection, I think, when we say realism, I think what we're looking for is authenticity of characterization, and the ability to find ourselves in those characters is kind of what, like, does it feel real is what we're saying. And yeah, this is a great question. All right, those were all the questions I think we had in the Slack. We've talked about techniques he used. We've talked about favorite scenes, favorite characters, the book in general. Is there anything else y'all want to discuss before we put down TJ Klune's book?
Just a final comment that I think you will forgive a lot if the dialogue and or story is good, because there were things that I possibly would have changed about the book, but at the same time, I wouldn't change them, because then it wouldn't be the same book.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot I didn't mention his use of summaries, which I thought was fascinating. So, like, you know, we rant all the time as a community about like no summaries in your work. He does this really great thing where he covers them up with reports, which is really good when he wants to summarize action. It's Linus's voice writing a report back to his main office, which is just fantastic. Yeah. But to go back to what Shane was saying, yeah, great dialogue covers a multitude of sins. Yep. Any other thoughts on the book?
I really enjoyed it. Thank you for allowing me to read it. Because it's the sort of book and the sort of author I never would have picked up on my own.
Yeah,
me too.
That's great. All right. Well, I guess that ends our conclusion. If you're listening to this, please go buy the book. It's amazing. Do what I do. Buy 2 copies. If I'm smart, I buy 2 in advance because I know I'm gonna lose one. Yeah, buy 2 copies. Anyway, yeah,
But if
go
you bought them
buy
in
it.
advance, would you lose them both at the same time?
Yeah.
I mean, you know me. Likely. I would lose both of them at the same time. I am known to walk around the office with 2 pens in both ears, like behind both ears, while looking for a pen on my desk. So that's yeah, it's likely I would lose both books. And TJ Klune, if you listen to this, we want to talk to you about characterization. Please come on. Come on to the podcast. Yeah, whatever. It'll never happen. So yeah, thanks for reading, everybody, and thanks for coming on today. I'm going to stop the recording and we can chat a little bit more. If you want to vote on the next book, come join the Dialogue Doctor Slack. I'll put a thing up. We'll do it in like a year and a half. I'm just kidding. But yeah, we'll put a book up and vote on the next one. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to turn the recording off.